Cracking Copy is a marketing and copywriting podcast where we lift the lid on writing for business and read between the lines of effective copy.
This is a podcast for creative entrepreneurs and savvy business owners like you who understand the value that great copy can bring to their bottom line.
We dive into a different aspect of writing for business in each episode, debunk the myths about how we should write, and explore the ways that writing can be fun, conversational, and creative, while also being high impact for serious results.
So listen, laugh and learn with us, Ella Hoyos and Minnie McBride, as we share our words and wisdom in each snack-sized episode. Expect some lightbulb moments, interesting guests and practical takeaways as we crack the copy code together. Okay, hello and welcome to another episode of Cracking Copy. I'm Ella Hoyos and I am here today with Billy Broas, author of Simple Marketing for Smart People and creator of the 5 light bulbs framework, which we'll come on to. So Billy, I think it's fair to say you are a marketing philosopher, a messaging strategist. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, thanks, Ella. Yeah, appreciate you having me. And hello to your listener. Yeah, so I didn't get started in marketing. We can talk about my backstory if you want. I was in a whole different industry and really learned marketing out of necessity because I was trying to leave the corporate world and do my own thing, that old story. And it was harder than I ever expected to do it. People make that sound really easy, but man, it took me years to do it. And the thing that was really the bottleneck was learning marketing. And then within marketing, the thing that really set me free was your field of expertise. And I love how you speak about copywriting, because that was really the thing that made that possible. And still to this day, the thing that I focus on the most, copywriting, and then even diving deeper into copywriting and asking, what is it really? And getting more into this idea of core messaging, which became eventually the book, which you mentioned. So happy to dig into it and talk about the power of words.
Yeah, I was delighted that you released a book this year because, again, I love the way you describe it. I came across you first through Tiago Forte when I became very interested in his methodology for building a second brain. And I've been about just over 2 years in my business as a copywriter and a freelancer. And when Tiago came along, when I discovered him and his building, I was quite overwhelmed with all the knowledge because, as you know, and as we can talk about with marketing and specifically with copywriting as well, when you get into it, this is a subject that goes deep. You can, it's a never ending learning process for me. There is so much to it, so much beneath the surface. If you imagine the iceberg with the copy just floating above the sea, but under that there is persuasion principles, psychology, market research, messaging. There's a whole lot of stuff. So Tiago's system for categorizing notes and being aware that your mind is for having ideas, not holding them, that really spoke to me. And I was happy to dive into his stuff. And then through discovering Tiago, I found you as his sort of right-hand man for his marketing and his messaging. And that's when I think I must have got on a webinar with you maybe last year, could have been the year before. And I discovered your 5 light bulbs marketing framework. And this was a new perspective for me, because even though I'd studied like people like Eugene Schwartz, American advertising man from the 1950s and 60s, and he had a great framework for people's stages of awareness and the customer journey, the customer buying journey. All of these things I started to join the dots between these sort of old school copywriters and modern approach. And it's been great for me in really consolidating my copywriting knowledge and expertise by sort of following people like you and using methods like Tiago's to categorize my learning as I go along. So that's great. I was also very pleasantly surprised to discover that you've recently been on Everybody Hates Marketers podcast with Louis Grenier and The Art of Online Business. And I feel like in the copywriting world, at least, you're a bit of a celebrity now.
Oh gosh, don't say that.
Yeah. So in my eyes anyway. So I'm very humbled and very honored that you're joining me on Cracking Copy today. So thank you.
Honored to be here. I won't let my head get too big. I'll make sure my wife Laura listens to this, and she puts me in my place.
Yeah, good for her. That's what a good wife should do as well. Um, and the other thing that really sort of attracted me and wanted me to get in touch with you is through your emails. You talk a lot about your business in beer brewing and your early career in beer brewing. Now, I'm very much, not a lot of people know this about me, but I love a good beer, a craft beer, a home brew, a real ale, whatever you like to call it. I just have a real appreciation of that. And while I don't know a lot about the brewing process necessarily, I certainly enjoy the drink. So another reason we'll talk about that, because that is I think this early days of your having your own home brewing beer business is what got you into marketing in the first place. Am I right?
You are right. Yeah. And I'll have to make it over there at some point. I know you're a fellow beer geek, and we talked about how I got to have a proper real ale from the cask in the UK. That's something I've dreamed about and, read about for years, but I'll make that trip one day, and you can show me the good spots. But yeah, that's all I want. I just wanted to brew beer and drink good beer and talk about beer and, hey, maybe make a living doing it. Wouldn't that be the dream, to live the beer life? And yeah, I eventually did it. I did it for a while. I eventually moved on from that. It turns out it's actually not the healthiest lifestyle to live, living the beer life and having all this beer around. But it was fun for a while, and it got me out of that job. And like I said, it was really the marketing, and the marketing piece was the one thing I didn't have. And maybe your listener can relate to this. I had a traditional upbringing, traditional education, even went to business school, got one of those fancy MBAs. And so going into starting this website, this humble beer brewing website, I thought, oh, I got this. How hard can this thing be? Right. I just sell a $49 beer brewing course. Turned out to be really hard because I didn't know any of this stuff. I didn't know this style of marketing. The style of marketing you learn in school is very different than online marketing, copywriting, sales. They don't teach you those things in school.
No, they absolutely don't. And I have to say, I did a degree in business and management. And in my teenage years, I had this sort of early dream of having my own business one day. I wanted to be like my Uncle Paul, who's now my ex-Uncle Paul, but he had 6 businesses, very entrepreneurial. And I modeled myself on him. I wanted to have his success. So I did a business degree, and I very quickly learned, not quick enough to get out of it and change my mind, but I learned that this was teaching me how to be a small cog in a big corporate machine. It taught me nothing about entrepreneurship and running my own business, which is what I'd hoped to learn from that. So yeah, can relate.
Exactly. All the exercises that we would do in marketing class in business school, you're pretending that you're working for a Walmart or a giant worldwide corporation, and you have all these. They even tell you, okay, you're assigned 1,000 salespeople for your job. It's like, okay, what world am I going to have 1,000? Now I'm the salesperson, right?
Yeah, you're the every person. Yeah, because
I'm everything. Yeah, you're the everything person. Absolutely. You're wearing all those hats. So wouldn't it have been valuable to put yourself, speaking of copywriting and the importance of empathy, even if that's the position that we're in, where we're this high up marketing manager and we have a whole sales force below us, wouldn't it have been valuable to put ourselves in the shoes of those salespeople and go through some of those customer interactions? Because it turns out that most people, most businesses, at least in the US, 90% of them are small businesses.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So what year was this when you were launching your business brewing homebrew course?
This was about 2008 when I got started, and I didn't make my first sale until 2010. I remember when that first PayPal email came in. I launched my introduction to beer brewing course, and it was a guy named Richard in the Midwest here. I'll never forget it. And that came in, and yeah, it was only $49, whatever it was. I think it was 27 actually for that first course. And I said, oh, wow, okay, it's not enough to leave my job yet, but it's something. It's that first sale. And so that told me that it was possible, although I still had a long journey ahead.
Yeah, so it validated that offer that you had. Was that an online course, or was it an in-person beer brewing course?
Yes, that was an online course. I primarily did online courses. I've dabbled in some in-person stuff, but it's almost all been online.
To my mind, you were quite pioneering then, 2008. Yes, we had the internet, and yes, there was online business in there, and there was e-commerce was taking off and stuff like that. But the actual online courses, I'd say, I feel like that's quite pioneering. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I felt like I was behind at the time because when I got online at that time, there were a lot of people already with these internet empires
Right.
selling. They weren't called online courses. You're right. That was a bit of a transition point. They were called information products.
Right.
And so you might have some courses, they weren't really calling them that. They might just be video downloads that they had, but certainly ebooks. And then even before that, even before the internet, you know, it was really just a continuation of this industry of it was CDs and cassette tapes and personal improvement. You know, Tony Robbins was doing this and Earl Nightingale. And I mean, it's been around, you know, you study the old sales letters. You go back to that famous one when I sat down at the piano.
Yeah, but I can't remember who wrote it.
Yeah, I forget.
I want
John
to say,
Caples, I think, wrote
yes,
that one.
Staples. Yeah.
And that was for a home correspondence course. It was a course. It was,
Mhm.
you know, done through the mail, and that was back in the what was it, back in the 20s or something.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah,
So it's
sure.
just a continuation of that, right? So I moved online, the technology got better. Now we're able to have these things like online courses. And then these days, and what we primarily do, and what I primarily do with our courses, or we call them workshops, is live online courses where it's not just someone going through a video, you know, DIY course on their own, but actually meeting with people on Zoom like
Hmm.
this. So,
Hmm.
so yeah, I guess I was early as far as online courses go. But yeah, so it was really copywriting was the thing. I tried so many different things in marketing. You know, coming from this traditional background, I was like, okay, I guess you got to relearn marketing because what I thought was marketing wasn't really marketing. And after trying all these different things, I realized that if I could just change a headline, rewrite a headline, I could double my sales, double the conversion rate on that page. So why am I messing around with all these bells and whistles and plugins and hopping on all these different social media platforms? It was really about finding the words. And
Hmm.
that was confirmed through studying these old copywriters and just seeing how much time and attention they put into the words. And not even to the writing side of what they were doing. This was a big aha for me. It was really the thinking that went into their copywriting that I realized was the big needle mover.
Yeah. Yeah. It's the strategy bit, isn't it? That once you, yeah, you've realized that there is so much. It's the iceberg metaphor again, you know, the analogy of there's so much beneath the surface, and you really have to get into that if you want to have the success. So I'm saying
Totally.
if it took you 2 years to get your first sale from your beer brewing course, that was a kind of painful lesson to learn in a way, but that is what led you to into this copywriting and marketing, the need to really understand and to get to grips with this.
Absolutely.
What came first for you though? Was it copywriting or was it marketing?
It wasn't even any of those words really. It was how do I make money from my beer brewing
Mm,
courses or how do I make money online?
yeah.
And then, okay, let me narrow it down to because I did other things too. I did about 20% of my income came from affiliate marketing. So I got into that as well. There's a lot of, and this was a big lesson too. It was always a challenge. Certain markets it's tough. It's tougher, I found, to sell online courses in education. And it wasn't easy selling homebrewing courses to beer brewers. They like to spend their money on shiny equipment. They like to buy the big stainless steel kettle and the latest beer gadget, whatever it is. And so it always felt like I was paddling upstream, and so I decided to continue with that metaphor, go with the flow a little bit, and I would sell and promote products, affiliate products, physical products, and someone else would sell them, you know, some company, and I would use their special link, and I would get a cut of that. So that was a nice revenue source too. But yeah, for the online courses, I really like teaching. I really like passing on my wisdom and experience, and so that became the primary thing that I sold. And so yeah, I tried you know all sorts of things to you know to sell those courses, but yeah, it was really copy that when I dove into that, it was the thing I resonated with the most too. I've always enjoyed writing, and
Mhm.
so I think you got to find also that overlap. What's the thing that works, and what's the thing that I enjoy, and that I also have some skill with as well.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you're right. You know, my last question was it copywriting or marketing? Well, actually, to put it, it was like more like how do I make money online? It's like what is the problem? This is what we get to in our when we come to coming up with our messaging and our marketing is what problem are we trying to solve here? And that was the problem that you were trying to solve that led you down this path. Um,
Yeah.
and as well, you're saying with the beer brewing community, they didn't feel like they needed that. There was an education process required for them. They didn't feel like they needed to learn how to brew beer. They just needed the next shiny object. And I think in the book, you touch on this in that there was an education process required to say, well, actually, I think that's the wrong question. It's the wrong way to approach it. It's not about, I think you use an example of what yeast, where the yeast comes from. It's more about, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure, that example was so just like in making bread, you use beer is kind of like liquid bread. So you use yeast when you're making bread, and you use yeast when you're making beer as well. And there's not just one type of yeast. There's hundreds of different varieties of yeast that you can use when you're making beer. But it gets into the weeds when you're trying to decide, okay, between this one and that one. And so I would get from very beginner people very advanced questions about, oh, should I use the yeast from Northern Belgium or Southern Belgium? And it's like, okay, at the point that you're at, you're just learning the basics. You don't need that yet. So for your listener, you're going to hear these, what you might call bad questions or even dumb questions that people are asking you. And I want you to put yourself in their shoes when they ask those questions, and then ask yourself, okay, what are the beliefs that this person holds that is leading them to ask these questions? And you find that they have a lot of false beliefs. They have a lot of misconceptions just because they don't know your topic as well as you do. And so what you want to do is, it's going to be tough, but empathy is often tough. You need to put yourself in their shoes and only speak their language, the language that they know at that point in time, and slowly lead them to knowing not everything that you know, but enough to know enough to be able to properly evaluate your offer. Because what I discovered, and this is what we talk about in the book, why it's called Simple Marketing for Smart People. There's 3 or 4 reasons I chose the word smart people, but one of them is because smart people who know their topic very well also have this curse of knowledge where it's tough for them to put themselves in the shoes of the beginner. And that wreaks havoc when you go to market your products and services, because you're speaking from your perspective. You're not speaking according to their perspective. So what I found is that prospects have a lot of objections, but they're not the objections we normally think about when we discuss sales, because that term comes up a lot when you're teaching sales. You have a salesperson, okay, you're talking to a prospect, that prospect's going to have objections. But those objections tend to be closer to your product, more related to your product. How long is it going to take me to put your product into practice? What about customer service? Is there someone I can call when there's a problem with the product, et cetera? But there's a lot of objections that take place far before this prospect knows about you, your company, or even the type of solution that you offer. But they're still objections. We just don't tend to call them objections. So my customer, the person in my audience asking the beer brewing question about the yeast, they had an objection, but it wasn't what we normally think about with an objection. So their objection was more like, hey, I think this thing is important. I think that I have this false belief. Of course, they're not calling it that. I have this false belief that the yeast that I use and the exact location in the world that it comes from is going to make all the difference in my beer. And if I just choose the right one, that beer is going to be amazing. But the problem is that they're not noticing all these other things that they're missing that are super important to have in place first before you even get to that decision. Mm-hmm. So that's the objection that they have. The objection is more like, hey, I don't even realize that this is a problem and that this thing takes priority over this thing that I'm asking about.
Yeah. It's really helpful to sort of understand what the beliefs are and to really get into the heads of your customer. So have you got an approach? How would you go about digging into prospects' beliefs? Are you a big advocate of doing voice of customer research, market research of any copywriting project to really understand your customers' beliefs? How do you get to that place?
Yeah, so for your listener, hopefully your listener is thinking about some objections that their prospect may have that are further upstream before even getting to you and your product and everything. And so then what you need to do is this is where the education comes in. And so we'll get to that in a sec, because what you need to do then is educate them to properly value your product and put those priorities in place in their proper hierarchy, where your customers or your prospects know what is important and what's not so important, because only then can they be ready for your solution. But you're right, you need to figure out what those false beliefs are in the first place. So we give a few examples in the book. That was one of them. Definitely listen for the bad questions that your prospects are asking. And then once you hear those bad questions, do that exercise where you put yourself in their shoes and ask, okay, what must be their beliefs for them to ask that question? Another exercise that this is probably my favorite. I realized that, there's a lot of talk, and your listener might be familiar with all these books about habits these
Oh yeah,
days.
of
The really
course.
popular one is Atomic Habits by
Yeah.
James
I
Clear. Do you
think
have it there?
everybody in the world has read that book, surely.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I got mine just within arm's reach too over here. And there's other ones about it too. So that's an important point. So we live, but I said, okay, well, and I noticed this in other places too, these patterns. So we live our lives in habits. We live our lives in patterns, in routines, in cycles. We've kind of gotten away from that in the modern world because we quantify everything, right? We have stopwatches on our wrist and we break everything down by our calendar. But it's really patterns, how we live our lives, the pattern of the sun rising in the morning and setting in the evening. And so what you'll find is that your prospects live their lives in patterns too. And if we know that it's important to have empathy for our prospect, which we do, and anyone listening to your podcast, Elle, I know that they believe that. I know you do a lot of episodes on customer research.
Mm.
So if empathy is important, then what better way to understand someone's lived experience, their direct daily experience, than inserting yourself into one of these patterns in your prospect's life? And so we call them cycles. So in the book, we call this the cycles-based approach. For example, if you are in the personal finance space, so let's say that you help people with personal finance, a great way to do market research for that and to use this cycles-based approach is to think about the cycles of your prospect's life related to this field of personal finance. So for example, a very common pattern is likely, if they're an employee, the 2-week paycheck. So what does that look like if you were to put it on a movie screen? So you have this person, maybe it's a husband, maybe it's a wife, getting this paycheck every 2 weeks. What does that look like? How does the paycheck arrive? What's the conversation that's had around that? Is it a positive conversation? Is it a negative conversation? And so these patterns they're going to be very familiar. Like that routine, your prospect knows. They have done that before many times. And so what you were doing then, sort of like the fly on the wall, right? You're inserting yourself into that pattern and just observing. And it's an amazing exercise for then surfacing all these different insights that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. So that cycles-based approach is a great way, one of our favorite ways to do customer research.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and another thing you talk about in the book, in fact, you devote a whole chapter to it, is about sort of upstream and downstream marketing. Because I believe that, this is about, as the vendor, as the person who wants to sell to a customer, it's about meeting them in the flow of their river, in the flow of their journey. So it's finding out their cycle, isn't it? And fitting your messaging around that.
Right. So once you figure out that pattern, that cycle that your prospect is engaging in, right, then now you understand them. Okay, now we need to reach them. Now marketing comes into play. And so this upstream, downstream metaphor, it's really a way to help your listener find leverage. We all want to get more output for our input, more bang for our buck. And this was really ingrained in me when I was in the energy industry. So I was dealing with stuff like things like power plants and the electric grid and car engines. And with a car engine, you have a gallon of gasoline. You want to get maximum mileage out of that engine, out of that car. So I'm just kind of wired to think like that not everything is created equal. Some things work better, that have a bigger impact than other things. And that's what led me into copywriting. I kind of hinted at this earlier, where I was trying all these different things. I was trying WordPress plugins and Facebook ads and all these sales funnels and everything. But I realized that if I just rewrote a headline on a sales page, I could double my conversions. So I said, okay, well, words, that's how I get more mileage. That's how I get more bang for my buck, changing the words. And so that's eventually then how I developed the 5 light bulbs framework, which we can go into, which is a messaging framework. And so it's based on this idea of you have your core message upstream, and that's the most important thing. So you have this river, and upstream in the river, you have your core messaging. It's kind of like it comes from the underground spring in the river. And once you dial that message in, that gives you that leverage because you know that message is really good. It's kind of like having a brand manual where you first dial in your colors and your logo and everything before sending it down to your Facebook page or your Twitter profile or your website or whatever it is. You would never just start and do your branding as you're making your website. No, you do it earlier. You do it upstream. And look, you can certainly take that too far, and you're always preparing for action and never taking action. I certainly believe in the idea of move fast and break things, do things, ship before things are ready. But typically, and the typical person I work with has done that and they have some traction, but it's like, okay, we've exhausted our, like Tiago, who you mentioned, my client and now partner and co-author. We exhausted his circle of inner fans, the loyalists, the super fans. And we said, okay, now to reach more people, we need to do proper marketing. So what we do is first go upstream and dial in that core message. And only then do we send it downstream. And there are two items downstream. So first you have your marketing channels. So these are the branches of the river, the direction that you choose to send your message. And this is what a lot of people think of when they think of marketing. When they think of marketing, they think of channels. So you say marketing and they think Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, TV commercials, billboards.
Podcasts.
But these are really just distribution channels for your message. And they come and go. They disappear overnight. I remember just recently Clubhouse was a thing. I don't know if it's still around, but no one's talking about it. Threads, it seems like Threads has largely disappeared. So that's not marketing. The channels come and go. And so that's one thing that's downstream for your message. You choose your channel. And then you also choose the second thing, which is how to actually get your message out there. And these are the tactics that you use. So this could be doing Instagram Reels versus Instagram photos. But small decisions like that aren't nearly as important as what you're saying in whether it's that reel or whether it's in that photo that you're posting. So that's the upstream, downstream metaphor. So the idea is to focus upstream first on your core message, and that will give you more bang for your buck when you go downstream to whichever marketing channel you use and whatever tactic that you choose to employ downstream.
Yeah. A way I like to think about that is, that messaging is about what you say and copywriting is how you say it. But you get your messaging right, that underpins everything. And then you make your decisions about how you're going to say it, how you're going to deliver it. But I do love that river analogy. That does make sense, with the main river flowing downstream and then flowing up, and then all the branching off into marketing tactics, platforms that you appear on, that kind of thing. Now, let's move on to, we've touched a little bit on chain of beliefs and belief building and getting to the bottom of what your customers believe about your products and services. But I'm curious to know how your 5 light bulbs messaging framework comes about from all this. And did you use that to market your own beer brewing business? Or has this come later? Have you developed this later in your journey, if you like?
It came later. The actual framework came later. I used it intuitively, but I wasn't calling it the 5 light bulbs.
Mm-hmm.
There were pieces of it that I figured out along the way and then finally put it all together. It was one of those things where it's very simple, but it took, and maybe your listener can relate to this, you have to go through a lot of complexity to then find the simplicity.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah, maybe it's best if we just walk quickly through the 5 light bulbs.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, because my listeners, it's probably a new concept to them. I'm familiar with it. I've got the curse of too much knowledge here, because I've seen the framework. I think it's great. But yes, if you could walk us through it, that would be fantastic.
Sure. And to put it in context, what is this thing? It goes back to what you were saying about what you say versus how you say it. And I love that. Yeah. And then the question I had was, well, for that piece, that's what do we say? How do we even answer that question? What goes into what we say? What is it supposed to do? And so that's what the 5 light bulbs gives you. It helps you create your core messaging. And so the 5 light bulbs are really 5 categories of messaging when you break it down. So the first light bulb represents your customer's status quo, we call it. So this is a place where they are now. It's their status quo. They want to get out of there. They want to change. And that's important. You mentioned Eugene Schwartz earlier, and he has this great quote that demand cannot be created in your prospect. It can only be channeled. So you want to find someone who has demand for something, and that might be wanting to move away from a problem or towards a desire. So what you want to do with light bulb 1 is give voice to that status quo. So light bulb 1 is the language of empathy. It's the language of saying the word you instead of saying the word me or I or us. So it really helps you focus on the prospect.
Yeah, the you rule. I love that. That's a really helpful concept. Okay, so that's stage 1. Yeah.
So if your customer hears this, they're going to say, oh, wow, she really gets me. She understands me. She's speaking my language. She's not speaking about herself. She's putting herself in my shoes. Okay, like maybe she actually has a solution to this problem too, because she can describe it so darn well. And so, but yeah, you as your listener, the copywriter, the business owner, you have to ask, well, Are there other options that this prospect has to solve this problem or achieve this end outcome? And of course, the answer is yes. And so what you want to do is, it can be easy to shy away from those things. We don't want to give often voice to our competitors, but I encourage you to actually lean into that. So you want to lean in, you want to give voice to them, and not do it in a bashing sort of a way. We really believe in marketing to people how we want to be marketed to, the golden rule of marketing, I call it. And so you want to be marketed to as if you're an intelligent person who can think critically and make informed decisions for yourself. Everyone wants to be treated that way. And if someone is saying to you, hey, don't buy from that competitor because they're just stupid or they stink or whatever, that's not a very good argument. And you're not going to buy that argument. You're going to say, okay, well, now you're just bad mouthing them. Like, that's not a reason to buy from you. And so do it the same way, I recommend, in that you make a reasoned argument and say, well, here are the things that they focus on, and that's great for them and for their customer, but they don't focus on this, and this is what you need. So that's light bulb 2, giving voice to those other options that your prospects have, including the option of doing nothing, which is a very common option for our prospects.
Do you talk then about the consequences of doing nothing in light bulb 2?
Yeah, that kind of flows back into light bulb 1. They all flow together, but absolutely, yeah, you do nothing, and then here's what you might expect. Here are we call them negative ripple effects of not doing anything.
Yeah. And in light bulb 2, you're giving voice to the potential solutions out there, of which yours is one. Are you differentiating yourself? Are you sort of positioning yourself in light bulb 2, or does that come later?
Well, that's a perfect segue into light bulb 3, because yes, light bulb 3 represents your approach.
Right.
Ideally, your unique approach, although it doesn't have to be, just giving voice to your approach, even if it's a pretty common way of solving the problem, is still totally worth it. So your approach, it depends on the product category that you're talking about. You'll find there's terminology with all these light bulbs, but with light bulb 3, your approach, if you're in let's say the copywriting world or the coaching or consulting world, it's going to be terms like your methodology, your blueprint, your formula, your steps. If you're in the apparel space, because you really see light bulb 3 in for any type of product, in the apparel space and clothing, it's going to be the moisture wick technology in the athletic shirt. It's going to be the bounciness of the sneakers if you're selling basketball sneakers, and how the technology allows you to jump higher. If it's in the health food space, it's going to be the turmeric or that special herb or spice that's added. So those are all light bulb 3s. What they're not light bulb 4s, which are the offer. So the moisture wick technology is the technology in the shirt, but the fact that the shirt is normally $50 and now it's on sale for 20% off, and maybe you also get a buy one, get one free, and then you can return it within 60 days. That's all the offer. And that the offer is just, again, that's light bulb 4. The offer is just a vehicle for your approach. Or said another way, the light bulb 4 is just a vehicle for your light bulb 3.
Yeah, okay. And this includes a little bit more on the pricing, and like you say, any sort of special deals, discount, the way you position it, the way you're packaging it, the way you're selling it. Okay.
Yes, and a lot of people get stuck. We call it getting stuck in that light bulb 4 silo, where that's all you talk about is your price and the guarantee and all that. And so we get a lot of feedback when I present the 5 light bulbs from people who say, oh, wow, Billy, now I have other things to talk about. I can talk about all these other light bulbs.
And I love how you represent this. So there's kind of infographic that comes with your 5 light bulbs, which is a bear crossing a bridge, isn't it? There's a bridge, and it's like the customer before, and they have to cross this bridge. They have to sort of go through this transformational journey to get to the other side, where they're in a position to now make a buying decision. And you're taking them through a process, aren't you, to get to that place where they're ready to buy.
Yes, I hired an excellent illustrator, and his name is Matt Strebe, to bring this vision of mine to life. So please check it out at 5lightbulbs.com, and you'll see this whole world that we developed. And yeah, we have a bear, we have an owl, we have light bulbs hovering over the bridge. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, but for someone like me who's quite a visual learner, that really helps sort of illustrate it and simplify it. And I think your whole core concept, everything you do, even the name of the book and everything, Simple Marketing for Smart People, it's all about distilling and getting to that sort of simplified way of explaining, a simplified way of demonstrating how marketing can work for your business. Okay, Billy, so I really appreciate you walking us through light bulbs 1 through 4 to your offer. But what is light bulb 5? Let's talk about that.
Sure. So you help this person, you acknowledge them, you show that these other options weren't the best for them, you presented your option, and then you help them implement your option with your offering, whether that's a product or a service. So hopefully now they have had success with your product and they achieve the other side of the bridge, which is we call it their new life. So that's light bulb 5, which is your customer's new life. And so what you want to do is also give voice to that new life before they experience it for themselves. You want to answer that question all our prospects have, which is, what's in it for me? What is on that other side of the bridge? So even though they actually experience it after they use your product or service, you want to speak to it beforehand because that's why they buy it in the first place.
It's like the promise, isn't it? It's the promise that you make through your messaging as to what they're going to get. And the light bulb 5 then is the transformation that they'll receive, hopefully, at the end of this chain. Is that right?
Exactly. It's the promise.
Okay. I love it. It's a great framework, and it's really a solid framework as well.
Thank you.
Can you talk to me though? Tell me about storytelling. I mean, we all know that we should tell more stories. They make us memorable, relatable. But how can we apply storytelling? What role does that play in the 5 light bulbs framework? And how can businesses use the light bulb framework to sort of craft more compelling stories?
Yes, and I love that you asked it that way too, because that's the way that is the way that we look at it. We look at it through the lens of the framework. So we start with the 5 light bulbs framework, and then we say, okay, how do stories fit into this? And it helps you see them in a different way because I love stories and I love that people give the advice to tell stories in their marketing. But I also find, and maybe your listener can resonate with this, it's kind of like, okay, I'm supposed to use stories, but how and now what? Like, is it like, okay, I write an email and hey, this morning on the way to work, I got into this, someone cut me off, and okay, that's the story. Now let me talk about beer brewing or whatever it is that the product is about, right? So do we just randomly throw in stories? What's the guidance here? But if you look at it through the lens of the 5 light bulbs, it all clicks into place how you use stories. So the important thing to know about the 5 light bulbs, and I hinted at this earlier, it's an argumentation-based framework. Not arguing like that road rage incident, someone cutting you off, but making a rhetorical argument and an Aristotle kind of an argument. And you're making one anyways if you're selling a product or a service, even if you're not giving voice to it. The argument you're making essentially is my product or service is worth your money. So we say might as well give voice to that and do a better job of making that argument that your product or service is worth that money. And so that's how then we can see then how stories factor in. So as you are speaking to this prospect, as the owl, to use the illustrations, is speaking to the bear, the owl is both educating the bear and doing the education within this larger argument that the owl is making. So the owl is making this argument, the seller, the entrepreneur is making this argument that I understand you, customer. They're making the argument that those aren't the best options for you. Those light bulb 2s, those other bridges aren't the best bridges for you. And they're making the argument that our bridge, our approach is the best. We can get you results with this light bulb 4. And when you get results, you're going to achieve your light bulb 5. So that's how we make an argument with the 5 light bulbs. And then the way that stories factor in, they're just another way to help you make that argument. So for example, you might be in the phase where you're giving voice to your light bulb 2 and you're talking about those other options and why those actually aren't the best options for you prospect. And in doing that, you might tell a story of another prospect who came your way just a few months earlier and who had tried one of those other options and failed at it.
Sure.
So do you see how when I frame storytelling this way, it has more of a purpose to it, and you can start to see how to weave stories into the larger picture of what you're doing versus just randomly throwing out stories about crazy things that happened to you that day?
Yeah, it's almost the most unhelpful piece of marketing advice is to tell more stories without giving the context and without giving those examples or some sort of parameters to work within. But yeah, if you can find, and it's all about keeping your ears open, isn't it? And finding those examples and having those conversations with potential customers and prospects about the sort of things they've tried already and problems they've solved, and capturing that and making a note of it and then turning it into a story, which you can then will help illustrate the points that you're trying to make and help illustrate those arguments that you're trying to make for your
Exactly.
proposition, for your offer. Brilliant. Thank you for that. And can you share, have you got any examples, case studies or success stories of any of your clients that have successfully crossed that bridge and used the 5 light bulb framework to achieve a transformation in their business?
Absolutely. So the person you mentioned earlier, my co-author, Tiago Forte, is one of them. So I encourage your readers to check him out. Building a Second Brain is his business. And we talk about him in the book. And but I'll give you another one. And this one is also mentioned in the book. So this is a small business that had been around for 40 years. And again, the curse of knowledge kicks in. And so that's a great thing because you have that experience and they're very good at serving their customers. But because of the curse of knowledge, they were also communicating in a way that they were losing the newer people who just weren't as up to speed on their topic. People that they could have helped who were just lost because they were using all these advanced terms. So they sold coaching and educational programs in the personal development space, a company in the US here. And so we went through, and by giving voice to these light bulbs, things that checking the box on the light bulbs and just making sure that you were addressing all of them, we were able to create some content that welcomed these new people, got them up to speed on their topic, again, through this process of education wrapped in this argument, the argument being, hey, those other options aren't the best for you, try our option. And in doing so, they had it was cool. The president emailed me after we did a big promotion and said that was the biggest revenue event we've had in our 40-year history of this company. Thank you. And so that was awesome. And then the really cool thing about that was because now all these newer people were on board and saw what this company was doing and knew all the lingo now, all of those other products, the more advanced ones that they didn't quite understand before, the customers, they now totally understood, were ready for, and started buying those as well. So we start to see these positive ripple effects take place, all through giving voice to these light bulbs, which help you surface these assumptions that you had been making about what your prospects know.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And then it's about retaining those customers and getting them to come back and buy more. So it's that loyalty journey as well, which is fantastic.
There's always more light bulbs.
Yeah, brilliant. I've really enjoyed talking to you today, Billy. I really appreciate your time and giving us all these light bulbs to think about. I hope there's been lots of light bulbs that have gone off in our listeners' heads today. And if you have any questions, then please get in touch, drop us a line. We'd love to, we can talk more about this topic. We can get Billy back on. Billy, with that in mind, how can people find out for themselves and dig into this framework a little bit more?
Sure. So the best place to start, even before the 5 light bulbs, is to start with the book, Simple Marketing for Smart People. And that really shares my philosophy and my approach to marketing, this idea of making an argument, this idea of this moral approach to marketing and marketing people how you want to be marketed to. So that's really our worldview towards marketing. So I recommend starting with that. And you can learn where to buy the book at simplemarketingbook.com. We got a few options there. And then I'm also somewhat active on social media as well. So if you just do a search for me, you'll see my handles pop up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would totally encourage anyone and everyone to buy the book. I found it super useful. And it comes with, I believe, you can get online and there's extra resources that you can download. So if you need to work on your own messaging, this is a really great guide that will take you through your own messaging. So you can apply it to your own business. Very practical, hands-on guide. So it's brilliant. So thank you so much, Billy. I do appreciate your time.
Thanks, Ella. Thanks for having me. Love what you're doing here.
You have been listening to the Cracking Copy podcast with Ella Hoyos and Minnie McBride.
Don't miss out on future episodes by making sure you hit subscribe down below to keep up with all our podcasts.
And more details and resources are in our show notes.
So we'll see you next time.